And we are live. Hello. It is so nice to have you here today. My name is Shamele, and I'm the host of Genealogy Quick Start. How are you? Please, if you have not done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Sorry. Hi. So I'm Shamele. I'm the producer of Genealogy Quick Start. You can find out more at genealogyquickstart.com. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, and of course, this is a Philly Cam produced show. So you can check us out if you live in the Philadelphia area on Philly Cam. So let's go ahead and get started with our show today. As usual, I am just so overwhelmed with the coolness of my regulars, Jim and Michael. They came up with a great topic today, which is census relationships, specifically 1850 to 1870. So they're going to talk about that. You know, we make assumptions, and you know what they used to say when we was back in school about assumptions. So we don't want to do that. And also, during the second half hour, we have the honor of a special guest that if you are talking about Indians in the family, I can't think of anyone else to talk to but Angela Walton Raji. She knows where to go, what to do, and how to do it, if it's true. So she can help you find out if that story about there being an Indian in the family is actually true. So, what's going on with you guys? Who is out there? Please tell me where you are. Whether you are watching live or you're watching in replay, we love to know where you are. And please know that we are so grateful for all the subscriptions. So definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel and like us on Facebook. So Judy, hello. How are you in Chicagoland? And we also have Linda. We can definitely use some sun up here. Well, we have sun. We can definitely use more to get rid of that snow. Hi, Jenny from Nebraska. It's very nice to see you. Shalina from Inglewood, California. Welcome. My buddy Dean from AAGG in Philadelphia. Hi, Dean. How are you? So thank you. Please let us know where you are. So what I want to do is bring on my buddies. We have, let's get rid of that graphic. Bring Michael on. How are you, Michael John
I'm
Neill?
good. How are you?
We have Jim Beidler. How are you guys today?
Great.
That sounds really enthusiastic.
Let me try that again. Great.
You know, I feel like that judge in that video they've been showing. I've got the cat. If you've seen that, you know, he's got that. His grandkid turned on the cat meme, and they're going to go to court testimony, and it's not the lawyer's face; it's a cat as a filter. They call it a filter, but we're not in Zoom, so I can't do that. But I do have a legit real life cat.
Cats are taking over. They started taking over the internet from like the very beginning with the cat on the piano. I still think that's funny as hell. And they are still taking over the internet. I don't know any of your cat names. I know Riley. I don't know cat names.
This is Ramona.
Hello, Ramona. How are you? Is it a Ramona or a Ramona?
It's Ramona when I'm irritated with her, but that's not right now. So,
all right, you guys came up with a pretty cool, pretty interesting topic. Talking about, where's that title? Census relationships, 1850 to 1870. So I know as an African-American researcher, the 1870 is like the holy grail for African-American researchers because it's the first time that all African-Americans are listed by name in the census records. But a lot of people forget or don't realize that there's no relationships in there.
No, 1850, of course, is the first census that every names other than head of household were included. And the time period that we're talking about today, the reason why we focused on it was because people are listed, but there's no relationships given It's just people in a household. And so we often sometimes infer maybe too much into what the relationships are. And we just want to be careful that we don't pick an initial conclusion and say, that's the way it's got to be because that was the first thought that popped into my little head, and left it at that. You kind of got to keep in mind there could be other realities besides the one that you're initially jumping to.
Yeah, because it makes you lazy because I don't know, probably a good 2/3 of them are organized. Husband, head of the household, then the wife, then the kids in descending order of age. An awful lot of the households are like that. But what we're going to stress here is not all of them are.
Not all of them. So let's go ahead and get started with this wonderful quick start that you created. Census relationships 1850 to 1870. So you guys, the step 1 has changed a little bit for the first time in forever. It's determine a family and a place.
Well, we already established the time, 1850 through 1870.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let us share a screen because you guys have determined a time and a place. And so for this first one, the place is 1870 in Bern Township, Berks County, Pennsylvania. So talk to us about this one, Jim.
Well, you ought to make Michael do that, although I think he'd be going, but yeah, this is.
I do that a lot, yeah.
I went to my home township, Bern Township, and just started looking through, and that's why I say an awful lot of them look very, very ordinary. But this particular one that we're gonna highlight is a Rickenbach family. They spell it Rickabach here, but it's Rickenbach, Rickenbach with a C on the, or with an H on the end, or the K on the end, all sorts of different spellings.
It doesn't count in genealogy.
What's that?
I said spelling doesn't count.
It doesn't count. Yeah. So here we have a Jacob who's the head of the household. And then kind of that prototypical family going down through until then we get a Silas who's 24 versus the head of household being 32. And I'll warn you, this is going to be a case where it's probably it is who you probably think it is, because my first thought is that's probably a brother of Jacob. Probably a brother, but there's nothing there that tells you that for sure. So we'll come back to later in the steps on what we go further. But we start with a hypothesis that it's probably a brother.
I noticed you picked a very well-off family. I don't have anybody in 1870 that has that much of cash value listed on the census. Even if they're exaggerating, I don't have anybody who's got $15,000 in real estate. So,
well, and trust me, these
you
aren't
must
my
live on the
ancestors.
other side of the tracks from where I do.
Actually, they dominated along the Schuylkill River is where these folks were. So.
Very cool. You're so crazy. So let's see. That was Jim determining a place and a time. And so then Michael did the same. And Michael, tell us about your family and your place.
This is in Mercer County, Illinois, and this is on here because it's different. You've got, and this is why you want to find them in before you draw too many conclusions. It's kind of hard to read. This is not the best example in terms of the image, but it's Philip Smith. You've got what appears to be a wife, a bunch of children in order of age, and then you have another female, 10 years younger than the wife, and then you have I think it's 3 or 4 more kids at least there under that second female.
And don't go any further. Don't break the lead. We're
okay. So you just, and the thing is, you've got to be really careful assuming what's going on there. I'll just leave it at that.
And the one thing I would guess that would be missing is that this is one household but 2 families.
Right. I cropped it. I mean, you can.
Yeah. Okay.
For purposes of illustration, it is all one household.
Okay, so that's all one household. So first, oops, sorry, get the you want to I'm having fun. So step one is you want to just, determine that family and the place. And then you guys said for step two to transcribe the image. So like what do you mean and why do I have to write? What are you talking about?
Well, I'm a big fan of transcribing. When you transcribe something, it forces you to look at it in detail at every part of it. When something just pops up on the internet because we did a search or we find it in paper format or whatever, it's real easy for let your eyes just to kind of gloss over, and you miss key terms, detail, because a lot of times our errors that are wrong, we find that out because when we go looking around in the details. And when you transcribe everything in that document, it forces you to look at everything in a little more detail.
Yep.
And of course, Ancestry, makes it easy for you now, where they, have a base transcription of the names and the ages already there for you, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not. So use that for your searches. But then when you get to it, then like Michael's saying, go to the image and transcribe and abstract everything that's there.
Because the other thing to keep in mind, their transcription is not always meant to be a complete entire transcription. It's meant to be the index, which is a finding aid to get you to that record. That's the purpose of that. We use them in other ways, but that's the purpose of that, is to serve as a finding aid.
Yep.
Okay, you sold me. I need the right.
Or keyboard. You don't have to write it.
Okay. Okay. Because I'm going to be writing my mark soon, because that's how infrequently I actually write. So when you see my mark, don't judge. Don't judge. So that's step two. We're going to transcribe it, get deeper, get closer to what we're doing. And so you guys said step three is then consider the possibilities. So let's take a look at, let's see who's first. We have consider the possibilities with Jim. So Jim, let's take a look at your possibilities. So let's go back to, where are we again?
We're with the Rickabox again.
We're with the Rickabox. So
the rich people in Pennsylvania.
They're probably land rich and dollar poor.
Yeah.
So Jim, what are like? So we have Jacob and we have Silas. Those are the two we're trying to figure out what their relationship are. So what are the different possibilities here?
Yeah. Well, as I said before, the very most obvious one is they might be brothers. They're within 8 years apart. But Silas could be a nephew of Jacob. He could be the son of Jacob's much older brother. They could be cousins. They could be unrelated people who both share the Rickenbach name. And this type of thing, just like with surnames, I say, go through a process of compiling all the spelling variants when you get a good new surname. Well, the same thing with this type of thing is compile all the possibilities, even ones that are pretty off the wall, just so you make a hypothesis and then you try to break it. And part of the breaking it is thinking of these other possibilities.
Love it. So those are the many possibilities, and we will talk about and come to what they are shortly. But those are some of Jim's ideas. So let's look at Michael's example and examine the possibilities there. So
the first thing I would I'll wait for it to come up. The first thing I would do is make certain, we crop this for the illustration, but look at other entries on the page to see if the census taker used ditto marks. We're looking at the last names of the others in the household, or did he do them all this way? Just to make certain the top bunch is all Smiths and the ones under Nancy Kyle are all Kyles.
Oh, sorry, Michael.
The first assumption would be that, gosh, I can't tell you what's wrong on this because there's a couple things that are wrong with it. That's the other thing to consider, is certain details can be wrong because there's one glaring error in this. But Nancy, given all those children, was she related to Sarah? Was she related to Philip? And she's living with, maybe she's her husband is gone or whatever, and so she's moved in with a sister. That's one possibility. The other possibility is the census taker made a mistake, and this is a totally separate household. You just this is an example where I wouldn't draw too many. Just on one census, I'd be careful drawing too many conclusions. I would, if I could. This is 1870. I'd see if I could get 1880. The problem with these people, if you look at Nancy, she's 25, and the oldest one that's probably hers, because I would initially hypothesize Philip and Sarah, those are theirs, or that's their bunch. And then Freddie, and I can't make out the other one, under Nancy, those are her children. That would be the initial, based on how they're structured within the entry, that those are Nancy's.
Are the possibilities.
And you're not going to probably find her in 1860 if we think about doing further research, because look at that, look at her age, look at the age of the oldest child that we're going to conjecture is hers. 1860, she'd be 15. Likely she's with her parents, and that's not going to give us any more clues as about this directly. But 1880 would be the way to go to see if it helps to flesh out some of these details.
So we have so many possibilities. So let's see what everyone said out here. I think someone said that they thought they knew the relation.
She could, and Nancy or whatever, it could be related to Philip. I'm trying to be like Jim and not give away the answer here too quickly.
Thank you. So someone said that possibly the females, Mary and Sarah, could be twins.
That's the five ones that are 5.
25 or 35 and 25.
They're 35 and 25.
Oh, okay. So
no, the ages are different. I can't tell you that. The ages are different with those two.
Okay. Someone asked, what are the ditto marks?
Ditto marks, and here's a good comment. If we look over on the far right, you see where it says IL. It's supposed to be ILLS, indicating those people were all sick that year. No, they were born in Illinois. That's the old abbreviation for Illinois. They're really close to the line, but it's like a double quotation mark. And that's just a shorthand for I don't want to write that word over and over again. So the census taker did use the ditto marks. You can see them there in the bottom right more so than the ones above it. He's used the ditto marks because he didn't want to write Illinois for the birthplace of those last 3 children. But for whatever reason, he didn't use ditto marks with the last names.
Exactly. All right. So that is step 3, considering the possibilities. And we still have so many possibilities here. So let's go to step 4, which is to consult additional records. So what do we consult here for Jim? What do we got here, Jim?
Well, since it was 1870, and I know that Pennsylvania death certificates started in 1906. My first play is thinking, hopefully both of these dudes survived long enough for us to get a Pennsylvania death certificate on them. And my hypothesis was right.
All right.
Yeah. So here we have a little montage of Jacob and Silas's death certificates. And as it turns out, when we go to succeeding screens, or you can kind of see it here, the parents of each of them are Solomon Rickenbach and Rosanna Meyer. So, like I say, this one turns out to be the first play of thinking they're brothers, and yes, they really are brothers. So this one turns out to be a yawn, but the main thing to take away is it's not always this simple, and you should be going through the whole the whole hypothesis and looking up these extra records, and before that, as Michael said, look up all censuses. Don't just go by the one census, but every darn census you can find them in, to see how much you can confirm from one to another, what anomalies crop up. Sometimes there'll be more detailed information.
Yeah, there's so much that can come up. So let's look at Michael's possibilities.
I think, did it go to a different, I think it went to the other example I had, Shamele, on the next slide.
Oh no, did I do that? And you just
Yeah.
telling me that? Okay, so
Yeah.
let's go back and
I'll go back to that one because, yeah, I can.
Thank you.
Couple things about my example is a lot more in depth than Jim's was. This is 1870 in Illinois. The 1880, interestingly, I'm going to try to give you the real short version of this. It had Philip and Sarah, and it had the top children there, the Abe, Lucinda, Samuel, Mary, and the one Jane, I think it was. Nancy and those others were not with them in 1880. And the short version of this is they all died before death records in Illinois give names of parents. So that was not an option. They one of the child who was the person of interest, when we found her death record, it gave Nancy as the mother and it listed Philip Smith as the father. And using probate records for Sarah's father, and a court case involving Philip and Nancy. What really was going on here, Sarah and Nancy were sisters. So those of you who made that guess, you were right. You were right. Sarah and Nancy were sisters, but apparently starting about 1864, roughly, Nancy Kyle moved in with Philip and Sarah, probably helping a small child, and by magic, Philip and Nancy began reproducing. Freddie, the Emily, and Charles, and a couple others were Nancy's children with Philip.
So we got double cousins here.
Yeah, and
there are newspaper accounts of
there are no newspaper accounts, but there was a couple things about this to keep it really short. About 5 years later, the entire family except for Philip were admitted to the county almshouse or county poor farm, and those records are digitized on Family Search. And when they enter the county almshouse, it's Sarah and the younger children, it's Nancy and her children, and the way they appear in that register is consistent with Sarah being the mother of the ones you see in the census listed like they are, and Nancy being the mother of the ones you see listed after her. Nancy was pregnant when it was February of 1870 something. Nancy was pregnant. She had the youngest baby actually in the county poor farm. And Nancy died in the county poor farm. There was a court case. Part of what also alluded to this, there was a court case, and state of Illinois versus Philip Smith and Nancy Kyle. And this was in the local court records. Philip was brought up on charges of adultery. Nancy was brought up on charges of fornication. And because he was married and she was not.
Who files charges of adultery? The spouse who's being wronged, or
it was a criminal case because they were these were criminal charges.
Could you imagine the halt that would go on to our court systems if
that happened today? Yes. And Nancy's children were all adopted by strangers after she died. And those records are pretty consistent with the death records are all available for those children do indicate Philip was the father of Nancy's children, but they're all living together in 1870 in that household, and they're all his children. So I'm not certain if that was on anybody's radar as to what was going on, but that was the reality in that situation.
So
to remind you to not jump into those conclusions.
I love that. So to talk about, you guys talked about, we're talking about consulting additional records. So continuing the census search, like filling it in that way, vital records. You talked about almshouse records. Where do you get records like that?
Typically these would be county level records. In New England, they'd be town records if we throw that in there too. You would
Don't
look
get in trouble with the New Englanders.
right. You could look on Family Search to see if they've been digitized. Back when I did this, they had not been digitized. But today, those records that I used are online at Family Search. They're county level records. You could look in the card catalog for the county or town of interest. I think they're usually cataloged as poor farm records, something of that type. But that register was where I got a lot of good detail because it indicated when they were admitted and then when they were discharged. And if someone else took them, it gave me the name of the people, especially the children. It gave me the name of the person that took the children. So that helped me track them, because if you go back and look at the last name, these people are all Smiths, and Smiths are bad enough when there's not all this other stuff going on to search. And so that was helpful to use those records. But I would look for Family Search on those. I don't know if you want to talk about the last example real quick.
Sure.
I can give you the real short version of that one. This is from, I think it's 1870, if memory, 1880, which I know is outside our time frame because I can't follow directions. But
no, this is fine because this is another additional records.
This is a different family. I'm trying to look at it real close because it's kind of faint. It's Harm and Volka and John and Trincha and Henry and Ulfert and Ancha. And one thing we sometimes do with the ages of the children, you can kind of get a clue. Sometimes there might have been more than one marriage if there's a big gap. Now, when you see a big gap, don't assume there was more, because there's a 10, 6, 4, 2, and then an infant. When there is a gap, it could also be they just had miscarriages or children have died shortly after birth. Those are also realistic considerations here. But what happened in this situation, there's the 10-year-old, the 6-year-old, and then the others. What this census doesn't tell you, because it's not asking all this, the head of the household, Harm, that was his first name, had been married before, it's a good old Low German name. I have a lot of relatives named Harm. I see that smirk on Jim's face. He had been married before. He and his first wife had John. That wife had died, and then he married Volka. That's his second wife, and she was the mother of the 6-year-old, the 4-year-old, and the others. Sometimes you can look, if it's 1880, you can look at the birthplaces of the mother to get a clue as to whether they had a different mother. If like in this case, they're all German immigrants marrying German immigrants, you don't get those clues. But sometimes you can get that clue if you look at the birth for the children. Look at the birthplace of the mother to see if they're all the same. If they're not, that's a suggestion that there was somebody had another marriage besides the one that's suggested in the census.
Great tips. Step 5 is to document your findings. So this is so crucial. I don't know. I've done this before. I've really researched really hard and I'm like, found the answer. And then a year later, I'm like, oh my God, what's the answer to this question? I really searched really hard. And I'm like, you did this already. Really document your findings. In one show, we're going to go really deep into what that means. But for Jim and Michael, what does it mean to document your findings?
Well, especially document your nil findings, searches you did that didn't turn up anything, or ones where they don't turn out to be people who are really relevant to your search, because those are the ones you're talking about. You're going to forget about, and then 5 years from now, you're going to do that same search again, and like, oh yeah, knucklehead. Those people weren't relevant to me back then, and they're not now. But I had forgotten I had even searched for them.
And also to keep track of your thought when you have a conclusion or when you come to a realization. Write that down because you're going to forget that later. Those are things you want to do too. And to address I think it's Hollis's question really quickly about why I looked at the almshouse records. In this family, at a certain point, I was just totally confused, to be really honest with you. And that was, in that situation, I just look at anything and everything I could get my hands on that might help alleviate the confusion, and almshouse records were on that list.
Great question. You want to see inside of Michael's head? You better be careful. All right, thank you so much. Let's look at the quick start for census relationships, 1850 to 1870. So, number one, don't assume. So, step one is to determine a family and a place. Step two, transcribe the image. Transcribe the image so that you can become more intimate with what you're actually looking at. Step three, consider the possibilities. What are all the different ways that these people could be related? Step four, consult additional records to find the answer, including census records, vital records, and off the chart records like almshouse records and whatever's available. And then step five is to document your findings. So that is census relationships. Thank you so much, Michael and Jim. So, without further ado, I want to bring on, I'm so excited to have Angela here because everyone has it. I tried. I was so happy I didn't have this. I was so happy. And I told my grandma, I was like, Grandma, you know, one of the biggest myths. And she was like, oh, yeah, we got Indians in our. I said, Grandma, stop. So let me bring Angela on so she can help us out. How are you, Angela?
I am well. How are you today, Shamele?
I'm good. Angela Walton Raji is a genealogist and an author. For me, she is my authority when it comes to African American and Native mixed blending going on. Angela has it going on. So, Angela, thank you so much for creating this quick start. And we're going to just jump right in because you always have so much stuff. So I want to save time so you can get to your stuff because I know everyone needs to hear it. So for finding the Indian in the family, Angela said step one is, of course, determine the subject. So sometimes like my grandmom just threw it out there. I don't know who it is. How do you find out who the subject really is?
Well, in terms of course, with any type of genealogical project, you begin with oral history. But when it comes to finding a Native ancestor that's supposedly in the family, you want to ask the right questions. And that's something that doesn't always happen. People will say, well, oh, who was the person in the family? But you want to ask the right questions. Number one, whoever the person is, maybe your grandmother, saying, oh, yeah, we have Indians in the family. Well, who? Can you identify the person who is said to have been of Native ancestry? Usually they'll say, oh, my grandmother or my great-grandmother. Then why are they said to have been Native ancestry? And this is something hopefully you can move away from, because they're going to say, well, she had those high cheekbones and her hair was so long. You can finish the sentence. She could sit on it. You've got to move away from a physical description of someone's facial features, from cheekbones. There's no such thing really as low cheekbones, but at the same time, hair length, hair texture are not genealogical methods of determining anything. Let's just put it this way. It would not meet a standard of genealogical proof. Okay. So you want to be able to, as you ask those questions, why is this person said to have been? Hopefully you'll be able to find out, well, where did this person live? The ancestral community. Was there a community of Native people living nearby?
Oh,
was there contact? Did that person visit that community? And did people from that community visit our ancestor with the long hair and the so-called cheekbones? But you hopefully will get some real information. If
so that
you don't,
mm-hmm.
You're still in that gray area. You don't have really a whole lot to go on.
So you went into kind of like step two, interviewing for specific details. Yes. So I really liked what you said about knowing if there were Native communities in the area. How would you do that?
Well, first of all, this is where it's so important. You know, you do not practice genealogy in a vacuum. You've got to learn something about the history of that community, the history of the town or township, the history of that county, and the real history of it. Who were the people who were indigenous to that community? Who were treaties signed with and probably broken, but who were the individuals who were there? If you're living in Robeson County, North Carolina, your people were not Blackfoot. Right. Sorry.
That's automatic.
On location.
That's an automatic timeout. live.
Seriously.
Okay, so that's step 2. You want to do some deeper, you want to interview, you want to kind of check out the facts and see if they could actually be relevant.
Yes.
And so then you have step 3, which is to trace them back to 1870. So you're giving people a break here saying 1900. Can you explain why 1870 and why you're being kind and saying 1900?
Well, okay. Well, one of the things that's very important to understand that people of Native ancestry prior to 1870 were not regularly documented in the federal census. But you start to see certain communities that did have large Native communities, and I'm talking multiple states, from New England to communities in the South. You will find communities of Native people documented in the 1870 census. You'll find them in Lake Charles, Louisiana. You'll find them in the Carolinas. You'll find them in New England. People are documented as either capital I for Indian or IND. You don't see the word Native, you see the word Indian in the census.
Okay.
So you do see that from 1870 onward. And I say 1900 for another specific reason, because there was a special census thing going on, which I'll talk about that too.
Oh, okay, cool. So are we ready to go to step 4, Angela?
Sure.
All right. So step 4 is to search the Guion Miller rolls. So what are these?
Okay, one of the things that's important to understand, and I mention this because as we speak in a broad sense, people from multiple states, I do Oklahoma, but I realize the whole world is not from Oklahoma. I researched 5 tribes in particular from Oklahoma: Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole Nations. These were tribes that were relocated from the Southeast and sent to Oklahoma. But plenty of people never left where they have always lived. And that's why I say the Miller Rolls for a particular reason. Now, the Miller Roll is actually a Cherokee-focused collection of records. In the early 1900s, the Cherokees sued the United States government for lands that they had lost during the Indian removal, during the Trail of Tears migration. Mm-hmm. They won their case in the U.S. Circuit Court. And the task was then left to determine, well, to compensate these individuals, if they can prove that they were truly Cherokee and not Chickasaw or not Mashantucket Pequot or whatever of the many 500 plus.
Bless you.
Sorry, what was that?
Sneezed. I thought you sneezed.
Oh, no, that was not a sneeze. But the thing is that the goal was to prove that you were of Native ancestry, and you would, of Cherokee specifically, because this was a Cherokee lawsuit.
Cherokee.
Now, to prove it, then if you were eligible and proven that everything was correct, then you were going to be eligible for a one-time payment of $133. This is the beginning of the 20th century. $133 was a sizable amount of money for most people.
A stimulus? Is it a stimulus check?
Well, we're waiting for certain stimulus checks today, but yes, this would have been definitely a stimulus to people. The reason why I suggest, even though this is a Cherokee-specific collection, people from all over the country, Cherokee, non-Cherokee, members from other tribes were applying. We're talking 90,000 files exist from all over the country. Now, to get into those files, there's an index. Thankfully, that index does exist on the National Archives website. And the reason why I mention it, because if you zoom in, now this is the Guion Miller Roll. There are 345 pages to this index alone. But the reason why it's significant, look at the states that they're coming from: North Carolina, Virginia. You will see IT, which stands for Indian Territory, Tennessee, Arkansas. As you move down, you'll see Georgia, you'll see Missouri, you'll see all kinds of states, Alabama. Now, Cherokees did not come from all of those states. I've seen some from New England on the Miller Index. But what makes it significant is because regardless of whether the individuals had Cherokee ancestors or not, if you see that to the left of the name, there's a number, the column that says number. That means that there is a file that pertains to that family, to those individuals who are applying to be recognized as Eastern Cherokees to get that $133. Money is an incentive. Okay. And regardless,
As it is today, Angela.
as it is today, you're so
Angela, can we just take 1 second, 1 minute? You brought something up, and I don't want to be rude to people, but I want people to just stop saying this, Angela. And you've heard this before. I'm searching for my Indian so that I can get money to go to college. Angela, could you please talk to me about why that is just so insensitive and just, I mean, it's important to know who we are, but wanting to do it so that you can, I don't know, Angela, what do you think about
when
that?
I give a presentation, one of the tips that I give is to follow the trail of names, meaning document your family history and avoid the search for gold. I have people contacting me all the time. Hi, can you help me find my Indian ancestors? Because I want to get a scholarship for my child, an Indian scholarship. Okay, wait a minute. You're not living in any type of native context right now, socially, culturally. This is not what you are, but you want to go and cash in on someone whom you can claim is part of a community of which you're not a part, so you can get some money. It's not even cultural appropriation. This is just, it's such an outrage. And of course, people will say, well, I want to get some Indian money. You know, you'll get a lot of money if you can prove that you're Indian. And I'll say, hold on. And I've had this conversation in recent months. I spoke with someone who lived out west, and they live in a community in Arizona where there are a lot of Native communities there. I said, you live in a community where there are a lot of Native people. Have you looked and noticed that a majority of the people are very poor? If there is so much Indian money, but still, if you look at different things that people are talking about, from the issues, political issues of the pipeline coming through their communities, many are extremely poor. Full-blood people entitled to all that Indian money that's not trickling down to them.
Let's just don't do it. Don't
seriously.
So
and I won't help you if you're looking for money.
All right, let's move on to the records. Let's people just think about what you're saying and what you're doing. We're adults. Be sensitive. All right, so you have some more records. I love your records. Let's get on and look at some records. I'm sorry to do that, but it just is a all right. So you brought another record, and I'm not sure. It says Eastern Cherokee document. Let's look at that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, this is actually a file from the Miller Rolls. You know, that big index, that 345-page index that you can access for free on the National Archives. This is what one of those files looks like. And it's rich with genealogical data. And in many cases, individuals were not necessarily approved for a variety of reasons. But there is oftentimes that person who was applying around 1905, 06 to be recognized as Eastern Cherokee, they are saying why. And the genealogical data is extremely rich. If the person had any tie, they were required to share it. In this case, we see the father or the parent that is listed there. It tells where they were born, information that's there. You see in the red box that's highlighted there, you will see that this person was talking about both wives that their father had, and both the wives were said to be Cherokee. And now this might be individuals who might descend from this family. This might be the only reference they may ever find, but it'll come from this set of collections called Eastern Cherokee applications. Yeah. And as I said, and of course, this is continuing on that same file. They're giving information. It's almost like looking at someone's Bible, family Bible.
It's great information. And whether they got in or not, it doesn't matter.
Yes. And that's why I mention it. And at the bottom, you'll even see more information with where were the parents born. And some of this you might say, well, I can get that off of the census. But as you go deeper into those files are often multiple pages. I only sent a few samples, but sometimes they'll ask, well, who are your grandparents and who are your aunts and uncles and who are your siblings? And this information is so rich.
Wow.
And which is why I say you all need to look at those Eastern Cherokee records. They are so helpful.
And so once they find them on the roll, They take that number, and that number will lead them to these cards,
to these files,
to the file.
these files. And the files are on Ancestry. They're also on Fold3. And Fold3, it's almost a quick click. Well, almost, because they've changed their interface a little bit. So sometimes you kind of have to play around to get to the collection. But once you get to the Native American collection on Fold3, you'll see Eastern Cherokee applications. So if you're looking at that index on the National Archives website, the row, which is an index, then you go and say, oh, here's the file number. Some of the file numbers are maybe 3 or 4 digits, and some of those are 5 or 6 digits long. There are over 90,000 files.
Wow.
And they are
I'm going in there and look for all my surnames. I think I'm going to just go in there and look for all my names.
Play around with them. Seriously. It is absolutely amazing, because people can find out pieces of data, whether they applied or not, whether they were approved or not. It is so rich. You cannot overlook this genealogically rich data, even though it's called Eastern Cherokee applications. Look at it, because it could be your folks from Tennessee who applied. And
so many of you guys out there use these records. Tell us how it went. Were you able to find someone? Carol says she has Native American percentage. As far as she can tell, it may derive from 2 different ancestries from her tracking. So that is so smart, Carol, that you realize that it might not, all of that DNA might not be from one. What a fantastic, you're considering the possibilities. I love that. What I didn't show was the bottom of this one. I really like this, where it has name your brothers and sisters and give their ages. This is just amazing information. Like,
it's a genealogist's dream. It's like, what? Oh my gosh.
And so let's move on to the next step, which is step 5. And that is to search additional records. So, you know, these records that you just showed us were not like the first ones that came to my mind. Some of these other records, let's look at some of these additional records that you brought up that were fabulous. So the reason you said the Guion Miller is because it's a larger geographic area, right?
Correct.
But these are a lot more specific that we're about to show, right? Tell us about these Mississippi Choctaw records.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, Mississippi Choctaw records, they are part of the Dawes records out of Oklahoma, except you see the word Mississippi. And the reason why, when the Choctaw Nation immigrated, they were forced to migrate to the West. They were the first of 5 tribes that ended up in what is now Oklahoma. They started in 1830, winter of 1830 into 31. But that was because the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek was signed in 1829, which, again, at this point, it was decided that Choctaws were going to relocate. But Article 14 of that treaty told people who were Choctaws, okay, you don't want to go, you don't have to. Article 14 says you can stay, but you must become United States citizens. In other words, the entity that you're a part of, this Choctaw entity, is being dissolved and moved west, but you have a right to become U.S. citizens and you can stay. Fast forward to the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, when the Dawes process land allotment was going on in Oklahoma. Choctaws who had remained were told, okay, well, we know that you all are Choctaws, you stay here. You can also participate in this allotment process.
Okay.
And if you're approved, then yes, you'll get a land allotment also in the territory. Well, over 7,000 files exist of people who did apply.
Okay.
About 1,100 people were really identified as they met various types of criteria. People in the tribe who could both vouch for them and verify, yes, they're part of us. But the remaining 7,000 were rejected. Why, you see those big letters there?
Like this, like the big
stamp. Okay. And look at the top of where it says Mississippi Choctaw, refused, and then the larger rejected stamp. These are known as the MCR files, Mississippi Choctaw Rejected Files. However, I recommend that people look at these records. First of all, it looks narrow. Oh, it's just Mississippi. My folks are from Alabama. Well, first of all, it's geographically specific but it still has a little bit of outside the territory. Number one, people from Indian Territory who had not been admitted on the standard Dawes procedure applied as Mississippi Choctaws. Others from Alabama did apply as Mississippi Choctaws. And of course, people all over Mississippi applied as well. And what you're left with is an incredible array of files with applications, with interviews. But in addition to that, I will say one thing about Mississippi Choctaw records, that this is the only collection out of 29 years and a few months of doing genealogical research. I have found a document type that I've never ever seen in any other kind of collection, whether it's Dawes records, whether it's military. I'm talking about handwritten, multiple generation pedigree charts.
Amazing. I love this so much.
Now, if you look, you'll see the name of Emily Loggins or Liggins that's there in red, and you see she's married to a man, Mr. McFadden. If you go back to the card that you just showed a minute ago, just prior to this image, that particular card is her card. She was living in Big Springs, Mississippi, and you see Emily McFadden. It gives her father's name. It gives her mother's name. And it's actually telling you, okay, she's claiming, there she is, Nancy, and she's claiming that she's Choctaw from there. She's not saying that her father was Choctaw. She's saying that her mother is. And then, of course, and you see, she's a mature woman. She's an old lady. She's 78. And here's a document in 1902. Look in the lower right-hand corner. You'll see when all this was going on. This woman who was 78 years old.
So I see it says see testimony February.
Yes, there is. Well, again, this is part of the Dawes collection that you find on Ancestry and Fold-Free. There's an entire file, which I didn't even include here, and link the application where you get to read/hear her voice, because you see what she's saying in an interview, where she lived, who her parents were, and just as detailed, in addition to that wonderful pedigree chart.
So talk to us about the Walton family. This is from the Dawes here?
Yes. This is part of the same record collection that Mississippi Choctaws are, but these are Dawes records. And these are, if you go to the other image, the first side or the front side of the card, these are my great-grandparents who lived in Scullyville in the Choctaw Nation. Sam and Sally Walton were my great-grandparents, and they were freedmen from Indian Territory. People don't realize that the Indians that relocated from the Southeast to what is now Indian Territory, well, was Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, they also had people who were enslaved and took slaves with them. My great-grandmother, Sally, whose name you see there, I knew Sally. Sally did not pass away until 1961. I was a little girl. She was my favorite babysitter when I was a child.
Oh, look at that. Slave of. Oh, my
Thank
goodness.
you. And here's a woman who died in 1961. And 30 years later, 1991, I'm sitting at the National Archives with microfilm, and this image passes by, and I'm like, Sam and Sally, oh my God, there they are. And there's my grandpa Sam Jr. Oh my God, that's them. And then I look across from South, slave of Emily Perry. What?
Wow.
Well, I had to figure out, what do you mean, freedman? What do you mean, slave of? And great-grandpa Sam, what do you mean? He was what? He was a slave of someone, Jim Davis. What does this mean? Now, if you flip over to the next image, this is the front of the card. Freedman cards are double-sided. On the back side of that card, remember the first line was Sam. This is now giving his name of his father, Pat. It says Drenard. It was actually Drennan. It's sometimes written different ways. But his father's name was Patrick. His mother's name was Lydia. And interestingly, Lydia's name is in an old family Bible, and I never knew who Lydia was until I found this card. And we have had the family Bible in our possession in our family since Sally died in 1961. Never knew who Lydia was.
Angela, this is so rich. I mean, you get their parents' names.
Yes.
Who owned their parents?
Yes.
Which of the parents had? It's just this is crazy good, Angela.
Now let me show you something. Now Sally was number 2 on that front side. You see
Yeah.
the name of her father, Eastman Williams.
Yes.
But you go over, he lived in Scullyville. But look, father's owner is not listed because he was not owned. Her father was Choctaw.
Okay.
And it says that when you see Choctaw Indian or Chickasaw Indian or Cherokee, this means that person's father was not enslaved. Her mother, Amanda Hunt, was from Sugarloaf. Her mother was enslaved, and you will see that her mother was enslaved by Emmeline Perry,
the same person.
Yes.
Angela, this is great. I want to take everyone. Angela, thank you. Oh my gosh. I love all of these records. Any of you guys have any questions for Angela? This was great. I want to go through. She wants to know, Kathy wants to know, are there any records for Ohio or Michigan?
This is where your local history is most important. Now, Michigan, there are some tribes that I know are native to Michigan, and I know I have a couple of genealogy buddies who are familiar with some of the local tribes in Michigan. They're not going to be necessarily similar to these allotment records that you're looking at, but because the Dawes Roads were created for the purpose of allotment of land. But there are records that certainly pertain to certainly Michigan. Ohio, there's some tribes that ended up later in Indian Territory and other parts of the Midwest that came out of Ohio and Maumee Valley and some of these other communities that were indigenous to Ohio, or what we now call Ohio. But this is where you've got to learn that local history.
Gotta learn the history. That's right.
Critical.
Let's look at your quick start that you created. And that is, if you are looking to find the Indian in the family, you want to do step 1 is first determine the subject of the Indian in the family. Step 2 is to interview for specific details. Step 3 is to trace them back to 1870 or at least to 1900 census. Step 4 is to search the Guion Miller rolls. And step 5 is to search additional records like the Dawes and so many other things. And those so many other things, Angela has help aids. Angela, have you provided some aids to help people that if they were interested in finding more information?
Well, one of the things that I certainly will encourage, a moment of shameless self-promotion.
Yes, it's not shameless. That's why you're here. Put them things up there.
Okay. All right. Let me, first of all, these are 2 books that I wrote. One I wrote in actually, let me backtrack. 2017, I followed a genealogy meme that Amy Johnson Crow had created, where she documents 52 ancestors in 52 weeks. I decided, because I researched these families, to document 52 families in 52 weeks. And,
oh my God, hold them up, Angela. Hold them up.
Volume 1. It's called Freedmen of the Frontier. Let me hold it up so you can see it. This is volume 1. As you can see, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw freedmen families from the Dawes records. Volume 2 was published last year, and they are selected Creek and Seminole families. And I go into detail documenting, let me see if I can, and I pull up documents.
I just want to say, you could tell, like I said, Angela's hardcore. The challenge was just to do a person, and Angela went and did families.
Let me tell you, I was young when I felt young when I started, but I sure felt old. And if I have an image of some of the families,
very cool.
If I have any, but I also included documents. Every single family chapter has the Dawes record, and some of them, if the interviews are particularly fascinating, I did transcribe those interviews from the Dawes application jackets as well. It was a labor of love. I don't think I'll ever do anything like that again.
Angela, thank you so much. And I know that so many people are going to be able to connect with who they are because of your work.
Thank you.
Guys, let's do our question. I forgot our question. Michael, remind us what our question of the day is. And everyone who's watching, please also.
Your question is, did your ancestor get a stimulus payment from the U.S. government? No. I think that the question was, what's something you have done because of your genealogy research that you never would have done before you did genealogy research? I think I've rephrased it maybe not in the best way, but it's a question that I post quite a bit. People will say they went to cemeteries, they went to a library.
We have 10 seconds. Everyone yell out.
Oh.
One person, Michael, where? What?
What have I done?
We have 5 seconds.
I
now.
would cemeteries is probably going to be a quick answer.
Vows
Look
of
at
the
family
poorhouse.
Bibles.
Family Bibles. Angela, you?
Civil War reenactment. Never thought I'd ever go there.
Guys, I want to do that, Angela. Thank you guys for
Love
watching
it.
the show. We're out of here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.